Why does the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame largely ignore certain artists and bands? Let's drop the needle on some of the most glaring omissions from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Hey Music Junkies, Professor of Rock here with your latest pop fix. Every week, as you know, we go in depth with the greatest songs in pop history with the writers and artists who created them. Next week, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is going to induct one of its best lineup in years. But for some of the inductees, it's a case of what in the holy hell took you so long. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ignores a lot of the best music from the 70s and the 80s and 90s. Let's talk about that for just a second. It took the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame many years to recognize rock acts like Rush, Journey, Bon Jovi, whom all should have been inducted in their first or second year of eligibility. But it seems like Jan Wenner hates rock music with any sort of melody. For years, I've scratched my head over all of these omissions, as well as many of the new wave and post-punk bands like Depeche Mode, New Order, The Smiths, for heaven's sake, Duran Duran, X, The Replacements, Husker Du. That's just to name a few. They're finally putting The Cure in, but it's over a decade too late. It doesn't make a lot of sense since the bands that I've just mentioned are darlings of the critics as well as commercially viable for the most part. Ever since the fans have had their say, though, it's been a whole lot better. But like Bon Jovi last year, when many heard that Def Leppard was being inducted, they were shocked. Now, it's not because Def Leppard isn't completely worthy, but it's because most assumed that they were already in the Hall of Fame. But let's talk about that omission for just a minute. Imagine the Baseball Hall of Fame without Mickey Mantle or even Willie Mays, and you'll begin to grasp the absurdity of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame up to this point without Def Leppard. There are only 5 bands in the history of our universe with 2 albums that have sold over 10 million copies. The other 4 are the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and Van Halen, all in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on their first ballot, I might add. Note to self, none of the aforementioned bands had an album with 7 chart hits. Def Leppard, not in the Hall up to this point. It truly boggles the mind. 100 million records sold, check. The first band to play in the middle of stadiums, check. I'm going to put the pleasantries aside and speak the gospel truth right now. I'm going to tell you, speaking for my generation, Generation X, you may not agree with me, but I'm right. Def Leppard, in that time, was pretty close to our generation's Beatles. It's not an arguable point, really, because when the second British invasion was happening in the 80s, the charge the critics would leave you to believe was by new wavers, but it really was, instead of a few lads from Liverpool, this go-around, it was a few lads from Sheffield, because Pyromania was the rock record of the first half of the 80s. That lit a fuse on MTV that exploded onto the radio airwaves and supplanted keyboards with the preferred instrument of the rock era, the electric guitar. Think about it. If songs like Rock of Ages or Photograph kick-started our hearts, blew our minds, it was just a mere flicker of what was on the horizon. What I mean by that is, I remember my dad telling me stories about the impact that Sgt. Pepper had on his generation. He said that it was an album that everybody listened to back to front, song by song, the whole way through, hundreds of times. And that's exactly what Hysteria was for me and millions of others for 3 years starting in 1987. It was undoubtedly the Sgt. Pepper of Generation X. You know what? I'm going to go for it. Forget Nirvana's Nevermind for a second. That's a fallacy that was claimed by music critics. The truth is, it really didn't escalate to every peer group and every social circle like Hysteria did. I would bet my life that Hysteria has been listened to by more people back to back, song by song, the whole way through, more than any record since Sgt. Pepper. Because you think about Hysteria, every song is solid gold, and it still holds up, and I have no doubt that it's going to be that way 200 years from now. The painstaking process that the members of Def Leppard went through to achieve the perfect album has been documented time and again. In fact, I had a chance to sit down with Joe Elliott while he was on tour. Def Leppard was on tour with Journey. He and Neil Schon at the same time. And I asked him about Hysteria, and he told me about the magic of it. Here's a little morsel from that interview.
It's like God's plan or something. There's this thing where he's like, keep going, you'll get there. And we did. We were just like Monty Python. We wouldn't give up. We were like the knight that had all his arms and legs cut off, like, I'll bite you to death. we were just determined to get it done, and we wanted it to be different. And we were only 22, 23 years old, right? We didn't know what we were doing. What we tried to create was the ultimate rock record with to be down with everything in it. What does that thing do? Let's use it. We tried to make a Sgt. Pepper for our generation. That was the blueprint. Yeah. And that's why it took so long. We went down so many dead ends and they didn't work that we came back up. The actual thing you hear didn't take that long. There was about 18 months of complete bollocks, just trying to get there, because they probably had it all mapped out. We were flapping in the wind. We didn't know what to do. It just took time, and then it all fell into place.
These are albums that have spoken to every generation.
Songs.
Yeah.
End of story. It's all songs. It's just songs. It really is. It's all about the songs.
A little bit of guitar playing.
Yeah, there's a cult of personality involved. I mean, but essentially the boss is the song, and then we come a slightly less second, if you like.
Yeah.
We're important, but there's no point in being great if you haven't got any songs to play.
But what sets it apart from other incredible records from that era are a few things. It's the genius production of Mutt Lange. It's the unparalleled and impassioned vocal delivery of Joe Elliott. And that's combined with the dual lead guitar sound of Phil Collen and the late Steve Clark that not only defined one of the greatest bands in music history, but it defined the soundtrack of my generation, be it then, now, or even in the future. What other band had a drummer that was so powerful he only needed one arm? It's the stuff of legend. You don't even read about this stuff anymore because it doesn't happen like it did then. So I'm glad that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally figured it out. It's about frickin' time. I'm telling you, there's still a lot of omissions that the Hall needs to repent for and get with the program on. I mean, why aren't the Smiths in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Radiohead, who's being put in this year. They wouldn't exist without Morrissey and Marr. It's really perplexing. It's ridiculous. Another one that leaves the mind just boggled is the Replacements. How can you put Nirvana in on the first ballot and not have Paul Westerberg and his band of misfits in? Because they inspired Kurt Cobain to take that rock and roll music through the alternative route. How is Jane's Addiction not in? Perry Farrell is the godfather of alternative music. And the fact that it took Janet Jackson this long too, who cares if she's pop? She was the biggest artist in the world for years and was the only one who could go toe-to-toe with Madonna, who herself was a first ballot inductee. I could go on and on, believe me, this is something that really frustrates me. We will revisit this, but do me a favor, hit the comment section and tell us what you think. What are the biggest omissions and why? I mean, the Doobie Brothers, there's another one. I mean, there's so many. Anyways, please subscribe and help us to keep these arguments going and help us build this community. Smash that subscribe button. Keep the music alive.